Hi, Dr. G. Love here, talking about community recovery from trauma, traumas such as natural disasters, shootings in the neighborhood or in the community where we lose a respected elder or a beloved child, as we just have in the city of New Orleans. We've just lost a 15-year-old real community activist, George Carter, beautiful young man shot to death. In New Orleans, obviously, we have been in a long-term recovery effort from the Great Flood of 2005 and the subsequent fallout from that. Here's what I'll say, as someone who's been on the ground playing a role as a community organizer and, most importantly, as a community healer, is this: platitudes really don't work. Very few people in a major community crisis have the wherewithal to go get the kind of professional help that's necessary. In our case, the professionals, myself included, were also traumatized. We had a situation where almost everyone lost their home, and offices were flooded, homes were flooded. So, our resources really dropped down. So those of us who could be real creative grassroots people, have a story to tell that I think is worth hearing. What does it look like for those of us who did the healing work out of FEMA trailers and borrowed living rooms and on street corners and in bars and cafes and alleys, at events, on the riverfront, on the lakefront. That's the kind of work that I have been engaged in for the last 9 years since the storm. And it's a real labor of love. First of all, it's non-professional. So a lot of so-called professionals are not going to be inclined to do non-professional work, like working out of a trailer or just seeing someone because they walked up to you in the coffee house. The next thing is finances. In a huge situation like that, especially down here in the Deep South, you're going to get a lot of members of the community who are, A, not insured in the first place, and B, without any resources, where people had lost, home and car and everything. They weren't really in a position to pay for professional services at the psychiatrist or psychologist or, really any office. So these were all upfront major concerns that had to be dealt with. And again, people like myself sort of rose to the challenge by playing our role as community healers. What was beautiful about that is an entire internal network of barter happened. I was homeless, as I called it, home free, for a good 4 years after the storm, and people always made sure I had a place to stay. If someone was going out of town, their friend would call me and say, "Oh, so-and-so's going to be out of town for 6 months. Why don't you sublease or house sit their house?" People made sure I had a great bed to sleep in once I got myself situated. A comfortable bed, People made sure I had food. People had made sure I had clothing. Basically, the community understood that in order to maintain its workers, myself and others like myself, that the community was going to have to maintain us. And so it did. It was a real beautiful experience, the reciprocity that we had. And all of that is the kind of setup needed to create the space for real trauma healing. A lot of people were re-triggered. The loss of everything is just like a wipeout of your foundation. So, maybe people who had done the work around childhood sexual abuse or rapes or, abuses and traumas from their early life, divorces and so forth, deaths of family members prematurely, were re-triggered. So the old protection mechanisms, a lot of people's old protection mechanisms or current protection mechanisms actually rely on a series of mindful activities that the person does every day. The situation in their home being set up a certain way, their life, the routine of their life is actually part of how a lot of us have healed ourselves through trauma. So when the routine is disrupted, you're really looking at a lot of raw, just potentially explosive triggers that could come at any time. Violent outbursts from people who are otherwise not violent. Real blanking out. people who had people who had a lot of people relying on them, myself included, had to take huge breaks because we started to blank out. I had periods of time where I couldn't recognize people. I couldn't even place who was talking to me. And like if a person would walk up to me in a crowd, who is this? Where do they? I can't even contextualize them. All these funny little things happen with the brain during huge traumas. So how do we first and foremost acknowledge and normalize it? I know that the use of the word normal causes a certain amount of distress, but I want to just take the distress out of it and say, how do we normalize it in terms of normalizing it for each individual? Okay, what's normal for my neighbor may not be normal for me. I'm saying really bring it to a place of personal homeostasis. How do I make it so that I, you, my community are not ashamed to be experiencing what you're experiencing? Are not so afraid to say that you find yourself losing memory, losing time. You find yourself with a very short temper around your children or your partner. You find yourself so depressed that you've begun to think suicidal thoughts. How does a person feel comfortable coming forward to someone else in the community and speaking those things without shame? That's really, for me, huge. Where are the safer spaces? What can you do as a member of the community interested in assisting to create a real, honestly safe space? A space where a person does not feel that they will, for instance, have child protective services called on them if they confess that their temper has been rising and that their impatience with their children has caused a feeling towards violence, or that there already has been violence in the house. That's real. That's a real question. How do you create a safer space in an emergency where a person can tell you that they've had suicidal ideation without them fearing that you're going to have to call an authority because they've confessed to you that they are an endangerment to themselves and others, potentially? Again, I know issues of professionalism are coming up. So that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about recovering in a community from trauma as someone who's just devoted the last decade of my life to doing that by any means necessary, because our professional systems are all part of the systems of dominant culture supremacy, be it overly linear patriarchal, white supremacy, capitalism, sort of towing the line for corporate entities, the power of insurance companies that create these so-called professional boundaries and barriers between practitioners and their patients or clients. All of this stuff has to be looked at. So I'm really bringing forward I'm opening the table for us to have a real discussion about creation of safe and safer spaces. Where did the queer people feel safe? Where do the people of color feel safe? Where do the poor people feel safe? Where do the people who have always been a little homeless feel safe? In New Orleans, we have a street culture. Where do they feel safe? How non-judgmental are you capable of being as a healer? Do you know what your boundaries are? Certain people, can you create a safer space for the Black transgender community that also street hustles? If you know the answer to that is no, don't come out here and try and provide that space, because the person or the persons who come in are going to know that you're uncomfortable. It's going to come out in your body language, in your voice. It's going to come out in your use of gender pronouns. It's going to spill out of you. So the question is really, how realistic can we be supporting each other as practitioners? How helpful can we be resourcing each other? How much do you know about polyamory? Or are you still going to think a person is pathological because they have 4 partners in a time of crisis and say, oh, you're using that sex like a drug, And what about the overuse of drugs that happened after Katrina? I'll tell you what I didn't do. I didn't scold every person who came in about their drug use or their alcohol consumption. I did encourage people to detox, to say, let me bargain with you. Can I bargain you a weekend or a week or 2 weeks? 2 weeks is always the best. Can I trade with you, 14 days of your life clean, just so we can do a little resetting? But that's without me bringing the judgment to the table about what I think they should be doing with their alcohol and drug consumption and their self-medication around a major trauma in their lives. So these are just my thoughts. I could go on and will go on, but this is just between us. This is food for thought. I really hope this generates questions, comments, resources, and so forth. All right, one love. Ashe, amen, aho, namaste, hotep. Keep it moving, everybody. This is Dr. G Love, loving you so much.